Chapter 121. The advantage is that we know the motives of the Chinese zodiac. Qisha said. Does this mean we have grasped the other side's weakness? Well, Officer Li shook his head with a troubled look on his face. If this contract is real, then it's indeed possible. What do you mean? Officer Li pointed to the 5th to 10th clauses of the contract and said, it is written in the contract that there are only 4 categories in this contract, which means that these clauses should not exist in the contract. Could it be that this contract has been altered? Exactly. Qisha nodded and said, but it's not surprising. You can conjure up cigarettes out of thin air, so I can also understand the words appearing out of thin air on the contract. Your understanding is a bit too inclusive. Officer Li sighed helplessly. Why can't I understand? According to the content of the contract, if the human sheep saw more than 4 clauses, then it would prove that his mind was not clear. Qisha thought for a while and then said, but looking at the situation, we can also see more than 4 clauses. So this has nothing to do with whether the mind is clear or not. It is not excluded that the dragon is using this trick to get rid of the human sheep. But the human sheep was a bit suspicious. So he didn't tear up the contract and instead kept it on him? Officer Li asked. Qisha turned around and raised the corners of his mouth. I say, Officer Li, your understanding is also very inclusive. Don't make fun of me. Officer Li shook his head. I studied formal criminal investigation, and those skills such as interrogation, inspection, examination, search, and seizure are hardly useful here. Anyway, let's not tell others about this contract. Until the next echoer, we can trust appears. Qisha folded the contract and put it in his pocket. Officer Li nodded and could only temporarily bury this matter in his heart. By the way, Officer Li took out 4 tau from his pocket. Qisha, here you are. For me? Qisha didn't reach out to take it, but shook his head instead. Officer Li, we are now people of Paradise Gate. They want us to work hard for them, so they should provide the tau. Keep these 4 to protect your life. Then you should also keep them to protect your life. Officer Li said, you are better at using the tau than I am. They can double in your hand, but it's just a waste in my hand. Qisha pondered for a while and then reached out and took 1 tau. Well, if I took them all, it would definitely cause dissatisfaction among the moral masters in the team. I gave you 1 last time, and this time I take 1 back. So we're even. Officer Li could only sigh helplessly and agreed to this plan. Then the 2 immediately turned around and returned to the teaching building. In this brightly lit teaching building, Qisha felt strangely at ease. This was a feeling of living with people. There were still rustling sounds coming from the road in the distance. It seemed that the worms had already moved out, that they were all subconsciously staying away from here. It seemed that the more people there were, the safer it was. If those worms were going to do something out of line, couldn't have swaggered around for so long. When they returned to the room, most of the people had already fallen asleep. All looked at each other and also found a place to lie down. Soon, snores could be heard. Qisha casually checked on Yimo's condition and then turned around to close the classroom door. Then he took a plastic lighter from the side and put it on the doorknob. After doing all this, he also came to the corner, picked up the previously heated can and ate a few mouthfuls, and then found a chair and sat down. Since coming to this spooky place, this was the first time he could have a good night's sleep. Between half asleep and half awake, Qisha closed his eyes. After an unknown amount of time, a barely perceptible sound entered his ears and Qisha immediately opened his eyes. The sound of the lighter falling on the concrete floor was not even as loud as the insect chirping outside the house. But Qisha rarely allowed himself to enter a deep sleep state, so he would wake up at the slightest sign of trouble. The bonfire had completely gone out and the whole room was pitch black. It took Qisha a few seconds to generally see the surroundings. There seemed to be someone opening the door and coming in the darkness. Qisha thought it was a teammate who had gone to the toilet in the middle of the night. But if that was the case, the lighter should have fallen long ago. In other words, the door was opened for the first time tonight. Thinking of this, Taizhou counted the 8 black shadows lying in the darkness and became even more convinced of his inference. There were 8 people lying in the room and 1 person standing besides himself. Who was the person standing? Taizhou felt that the situation was a bit bad. He remained quiet and then felt his pocket and found that there was no weapon for self-defense at all. The black shadow slowly walked to a lying person and looked down at her. If Taizhou remembered correctly, the person lying there was Lin King. Could someone have malicious intentions? Taizhou slowly stood up and moved his feet. The other person was a bit careless. He couldn't have expected that someone in the room would sit and sleep all night. The man reached out and stroked Lin King's hair, then lowered his head and sniffed the fragrance on Lin King's body, and then turned and walked to another person. Taizhou slowly stopped and watched the situation. The man came to Han Wai Aimo again. This time he didn't move and just stood quietly beside Han Wai Aimo for a while. Just when Taizhou was full of doubts, the man walked towards another person again, looking at the direction. It should be Officer Li. Officer Li was snoring continuously and didn't notice the change beside him at all. After a few seconds of hesitation in the direction of the black shadow, the barely audible word "strange" came out. Immediately after that, he moved his feet again and seemed to be looking for something in the room, and Keizhou had been standing not far behind the other person, following his footsteps and always avoiding the other person's line of sight. When the black shadow began to check the situation in the room, Taizhou was 3 or 5 steps behind the other person. For Taizhou, at present, this black shadow hadn't made any out-of-line actions, even if he subdued the other person. There was no excuse. If the other person was from Paradise Gate and pretended to visit to see if everyone was used to living here, what should he do? Or if the other person claimed to have entered the wrong room, what should he do? As the saying goes, catch a thief. You need to catch the stolen goods. Taizhou could only stare at the black shadow cautiously and be ready to attack at any time. The black shadow looked around the room and then touched his chin in confusion. Then he stretched out his finger and counted the 8 people lying down. After a while, he froze in place. Taizhou frowned slightly and felt that things were not going well. If the other person knew the people in the room very well, he should know that one person was missing at this time. Thinking of this, Keizhou immediately turned around to close the door. At the same time, the black shadow turned around and ran. The two almost rushed to the classroom door at the same time. Taizhou knew it was too late to close the door, so he reached out to grab the other person. But the other person turned around and dodged, being able to decide to run away at the first time. It seems that he is not a fool. Taizhou thought for a moment and immediately shouted, "Stop!" A loud shout startled the whole teaching building. If someone else woke up, the black shadow in front of him would have nowhere to hide. The black shadow didn't hesitate anymore and ran away down the corridor at a brisk pace. Keizhou was only 3 or 5 steps away from the other person. Just as he was about to reach out and grab the other person, Taizhou saw the black shadow jump on the flat ground. Before Taizhou could react to what it meant, he felt a sudden trip under his feet and immediately flew out and fell. The other person had actually laid a rope on the ground in advance. Seeing the other person disappear at the end of the corridor in a flash, Taizhou felt that the situation was not good. He ignored the pain and after thinking for a while, he directly turned around and ran back to the classroom. At this time, everyone gradually began to wake up. Taizhou, what happened? Lin King asked with some worry. Someone broke in. Taizhou opened the classroom window and directly jumped into the yard. Yao Jiaojin frowned after hearing this and quickly followed.